since the release of the first X-Men movie back in the year 2000, movies based off Marvel properties have kind of dominated at the box office. Whether the X-Men properties, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, or the current Marvel Cinematic Universe, these movies tend to do well with critics, not all of them, but a lot of them do well with critics, and they make money at the box office. But what about the movies based off Marvel properties that didn't do so well? The failed attempts, the movies forgotten by time. This video is here to talk about 16 of those films in particular. Now, while I'm talking, be sure to tell me down below in the comment section which one of these have you seen, which ones have you heard of, which ones have you not heard of, because there's some weird, quirky projects in there that I think we can have some lively chatter about. With that said, let's start talking about these. First up, we've got Captain America: The Serials from 1944. Now, this is the first time that a Marvel property was ever filmed live action and shown in a theater. And this even predated before they were known as Marvel Comics. That's just how old these are. And it's a very different rendition of Captain America from what we typically know. Here's the description from Wikipedia. The serial sees Captain America, really District Attorney Grant Gardner, trying to thwart the plans of the Scarab, really museum curator Dr. Cyrus Maldor, especially regarding his attempts to acquire the dynamic vibrator, funny name, and electronic fireball, devices that could be used as super weapons. Now, technically speaking, this wasn't a movie, but it was shown in theaters. It was shown in like 15 to 20-minute chapters, and there's about 15 of these chapters. The whole thing is like 3 or 4 hours long, but this is the first time one of these properties was shown in theaters. Coming up next, we've got Spider-Man, the 1977 pilot TV movie. Now, if you weren't familiar with this, back in the 70s, there was actually a Spider-Man live-action TV show, and this movie was the pilot episode for it, but it was released as a TV movie. The show, while a rating success, was rather expensive to create, so they only ended up making 2 seasons of like 6-7 episodes each, so only 13 total episodes before they kind of abandoned the project. And throughout the process of it, because the Spider-Man effects were so dangerous and expensive at the time, they would shoot multiple angles, so shots in the different episodes would seem very familiar because it was the exact same stunt being repeated multiple times. When Stan Lee was interviewed about this show, he was quoted as saying, "Spider-Man was a total nightmare." Our third film is Doctor Strange, the 1978 TV movie. Now, this movie was made by the same studio that created the Spider-Man TV movie, and they tried to do the same sort of strategy of creating a pilot movie to lead into a series, except this one didn't land with audiences or with critics, and so it never went to series, so we just have this standalone TV pilot movie. This is one that Stan Lee actually had more positive things to say about it. This is what he had to say. "I probably had the most input into that one. I became good friends with the writer-producer Phil DeGuerre. I was pleased with Doctor Strange and the Incredible Hulk. I think Doctor Strange would have done much better than it did in the ratings, except that it aired opposite routes. Those are the only experiences I've had with live-action television. Doctor Strange and the Hulk were fine." Our next 2 entries are the TV movies from 1979, Captain America and Captain America 2, Death Too Soon. So back in the late 70s, obviously they were trying to convert a bunch of different Marvel properties into TV shows and TV movies, and we got some Captain America back in the day. And much like these serials from the 1940s, it was a very different version of Captain America than what we traditionally know. This is the description from Wikipedia. "Steve Rogers is a contemporary man whose father was a 1940s government agent. The very patriotic attitude of Steve's father earned him the nickname Captain America. His father was later murdered. Rogers, a former Marine, now making a living as an artist and traveling the countryside in a conversion van, is inspired by his father's story to sketch a superhero. After receiving potentially fatal injuries in an attempt on his life intended to seem like an accident, he is administered an experimental chemical called the Flag Formula." Now, this show focused heavily on kind of the gizmos and gadgets. He's still got his shield, but it looks kind of flimsy. But there's also that van that they just talked about that's converted into like a motorcycle launcher. There's a glider thing on the motorcycle. There's a bunch of stuff like that that's very new and different for Captain America. Coming in at number 6 is going to be the most famous, infamous movie on this list, Howard the Duck. After completing Return of the Jedi, George Lucas decided he wanted to translate a Marvel property to the screen, and the end result is one of the creepiest and weirdest Marvel properties ever, and it's probably for good reason. It kind of got forgotten or remembered in cult status ever since then, until he showed up at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy. This movie is so messed up that you can go on YouTube and find a video titled "The 10 Most Disturbing Howard the Duck Moments," and I do encourage you to check that out because It's an interesting one. Next 3 movies on our list are The Incredible Hulk Returns, The Trial of the Incredible Hulk, and The Death of the Incredible Hulk. Each of these movies is a continuation of the Incredible Hulk TV series from the late 70s and the early 80s. In The Return of the Incredible Hulk, Thor shows up in it, but it's kind of a dated version of Thor, not like the ones we see in the current movies. There's a guy that has a hammer and can summon Thor, kind of like Shazam. And then Trial of the Incredible Hulk has Daredevil showing up in it, and I found that one to be a little bit more pleasant of a movie. And then The Death of the Incredible Hulk, well, the Incredible Hulk dies in it, as you might be able to guess from the title. But the movies, I didn't feel kind of that, they felt a little bit more dated and out of time than the previous TV series did, as well as bringing in mystical elements that felt out of place for the world that had been created up to that point in time. The 10th film on our list is going to be The Punisher 1989. At the time I'm filming this, we're just a few days away from the Punisher TV series debuting on Netflix. And with that, there's kind of been a lot of discussion about the Punisher Warzone movie, the Thomas Jane one, but the one that kind of gets forgotten is the one starring Ivan Drago himself, Dolph Lundgren. And you can see why back in the year 1989, this would have seemed like a pretty safe bet. This was like the peak of action movies that were coming out. They had Ivan Drago from Rocky IV starring in the movie, and then the movie kind of got shelved for a while, got a very limited release, and kind of got forgotten a little bit by time. And the thing that's actually kind of most interesting about the movie is that it was written by Boaz Yakin, who went on to be a fairly prolific screenwriter that did some big A-list type movies, as well as directing like Remember the Titans, Uptown Girls, Max, the dog movie from just a couple years ago. But all in all, this movie's fairly generic and forgettable. Next up, we've got Captain America, the 1990 film. Now, this one is the one on the list that is most dear to my heart, as I had this film recorded on VHS off of, I believe, Cinemax or HBO, and I watched it all of the time when I was growing up. I didn't know better. I didn't know it was awful. And having rewatched it just a few days ago, it's pretty bad. Now, it's got some great casting in there with Ronnie Cox and Ned Beatty, and they're actually pretty good in the movie. The movie overall, though, just is kind of a train wreck of a movie with no internal logic. Doesn't make a lot of sense. I've actually saw an interview on Screen Junkies where they interviewed the screenwriter, where he attempted to explain how good his script was and how the director went off bonkers with it, changed stuff and added things. And I actually believe him, given the other credits of the director of the film. Coming in at number 12 is going to be Roger Corman's The Fantastic Four. Back in the day when I was a little kid that rode my bike to comic book stores, I would buy Wizard magazine every single month to get my comic book news, and I had the Wizard magazine that had a picture of Doctor Doom and the Fantastic Four in it. Back in the day, I was like, oh cool, a Fantastic Four movie's coming out. And then a year went by, and another year, and the movie never came out. And like 5, 6, 7 years later, a friend of mine gave me a bootlegged copy of it, and I watched it. I was like, holy cow, this is horrible. These effects are atrocious. What is this? Well, what it was the movie was made dirt cheap because they never intended to release it in theaters. They made it basically just to hold on to the rights to the movie, and they didn't tell the cast and the crew, and they put articles in Wizard magazine, and the whole thing was a sham. And there's actually a documentary about it called Doomed, about the making of this movie. You should check it out. It's a fascinating thing. I love stuff like that. But this movie itself is horrible. It is amazingly bad. Coming up next, we've got Generation X. In the late 90s, they made a TV movie about Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. It starred Jubilee, Emma Frost, and Banshee as some of the students at the school who have to battle an evil mad scientist played by Matt Frewer, who is obsessed with dreams. And even though it was shot at the same mansion that the later X-Men movies were shot at, doesn't really feature any of your favorite X-Men or mutants or anything like that. Production quality looks like a bad 90s TV movie, and it's better left forgotten. Coming in at number 14 is going to be Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. So in the late 90s, they actually made a TV movie of Nick Fury starring David Hasselhoff, which looking back on it is kind of hilarious and seems bizarre because he's kind of become this cartoonish public figure. But back at the time, it made a lot of sense. He had been the action star in the 80s with Knight Rider. He was a gigantic worldwide TV star because of Baywatch at the time. And the comic book character at the time looked like David Hasselhoff. It wasn't until a few years later where the Ultimates comic changed Nick Fury to look like Samuel L. Jackson. That literally in the comic book, they designed him after Samuel L. Jackson. The plot involves Nick Fury Fury coming out of retirement to stop Hydra from releasing a pathogen in Manhattan. Here's the craziest thing about this movie though. The writer of it is David Goyer. This is the guy behind Blade, Batman Begins, Ghost Rider, The Dark Knight, Man of Steel, Batman v Superman. The movie itself is very cheesy, very campy, and you can just look at the clips from it and know every single thing you need to know about it. Coming up next, we've got Elektra 2005. Now this movie is a spin-off sequel to Ben Affleck's Daredevil, and in that it stars Jennifer Garner. It also has Terrence Stamp as Stick. And while this movie was wide released, I don't hear anyone talk about it. No one mentions this movie ever, not even on worst of lists. It's just forgotten. Even though it's got Elektra with Jennifer Garner battling ninjas in the hand, it's just a movie that was meh. It's not so bad it's good, it's just so bad it's boring and forgettable. And finally, we have Man-Thing 2005. We're gonna end with possibly the most forgettable movie on this list, as it's based off of a D-level Marvel character that they tried to put in theaters and ended up having to go straight to sci-fi, and it's been totally forgotten by time. Here's the plot description on Wikipedia. Agents of an oil tycoon vanish while exploring a swamp marked for drilling. The local sheriff investigates and faces a seminal legend come to life. Man-Thing, a shambling swamp monster. The most interesting thing I could find about this movie is in the comment section of the YouTube trailer, and it comes from Wade Wilson, I assume the actual Wade Wilson, and he said this: "Congratulations, folks. You found a trailer to a movie 100 times worse than Fan 4 Stick." And that is our list of these 16 forgotten movies based off of Marvel properties. Tell me down below, which ones had you heard of? Which ones have you actually seen? Which ones do you have a funny story about? I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Maybe you have some nostalgia from watching some of these back in the 80s or the 90s or something like that. And if you're new to my channel, please consider clicking that subscribe button. I do movie reviews, TV reviews, ranking videos, but the key thing is I don't want to just talk about movies, I want to talk about movies with you. So join me down in the comment section. Let's have a lively discussion, and thank you so much for watching.